In the wise words of Mr. C.S. Lewis himself, humility is not thinking less of yourself, but rather it's thinking of yourself less. I think that this is a really good starting point for today's B-Rad podcast as we dive into the world of humility. Because I'm not sure about you, but I have fallen into the trap of sometimes humility is to think less of ourselves, degrade and to enter into some warped version of who we are, thinking of ourselves like that. But rather, if we do start to think of ourselves a little bit less, then that does open up the possibility for a greater way of thinking, a greater way of being in the world that moves beyond just the small little piece that we understand right now. So welcome everyone to the B-Rad podcast. My name is Brad Taves, and the title of today's talk, which is episode number 7, is called Served by the Slice. So humility, the way that I see this is that you've got a spectrum, and on one hand of the spectrum you have false humility, and on the other side you have forgetting humility. So false humility is much connected to low self-esteem. Maybe you wouldn't think that, certainly I didn't, but I thought I was a really humble guy when I was a kid, but really I just had low self-esteem. I didn't understand the value and the worth that I inherently had, and I thought that humility meant to just totally downplay that and to play super, super small in the world. And to me, I equated that to being humble, and that's how I lived. It didn't serve me by any means, but that was my false sense of humility. If you swing the pendulum on the other side, you have forgetting humility. And this is where you go the opposite direction and you exaggerate the self. It's an overinflated self-esteem. And that phrase, fake it until you make it, crops up where you're not really that person or you haven't accomplished it. So you're just going to pretend to be that thing. And maybe over time you'll become it. And although there's something of truth to that, I think even C.S. Lewis talks about that, of having the courage to do something even before you're ready to do it. But if at the core of who you are, you're not that, why would you fake being someone when you're not that? Just wouldn't it be better to be honest about who you are? This forgetting humility and acting in that way certainly breeds arrogance. And arrogance, based on how I would understand it, is the attempt that we make to prove our worth, who we are and what we're capable of doing. It really is that overestimation of ourselves. And also it is, we want to appeal to a wider audience. So we'll kind of do things to make ourselves look a certain way. And we certainly have this attitude of like, I got this. I can do this and no one needs to tell me how to do this. So I had an experience like this about 10 years ago. We were living in Halifax, which is on the east coast of Canada. We moved back to the Toronto area. At the end of that, or at the beginning of that time, or as we were transitioning and moving, I just finished up a 2-year stint of working with my dad, and we had been working on homes. We renovated them, we bought them, we flipped them, we did other projects. And so for a couple of years, I had a pretty good understanding of how to not just to build the house from the ground up. That wasn't all that we did, but it's more of like renovating existing homes. And so when we moved, I thought, okay, I can do this. Let's buy a house that I can maybe do some work in. And we quickly bought this house. And, you know, with my know-it-all sort of attitude, I didn't get a proper inspection. And it was really quick, and it really harmed us, because after purchasing the house, we realized that there was a ton of mold. There was kind of a cover-up job in the bathrooms. And for 3 months, we had nowhere to live because I had to work on the house. It was completely empty. Dawn and the kids, they slept in a trailer that was kind of parked in our garage, a carport area, and they went to other people's homes. It was a mess. It was a disaster. It cost us financially. It cost us with our time because we weren't able to make decisions for setting up for a career coming up into the fall, and me teaching music and whatnot. And it was so difficult. And it really was that pride comes before the fall experience. And again, it cost us for years afterwards, financially, and just the tension in our home and having to live through that. There's an amazing song by Nicole Nordman, and the song is called The Unmaking. And here are a few of the lyrics that really describe this to a T. She says, "This is demolition day, all the debris and all this dust, sorting through what goes and what should stay." That's exactly what I went through. Literally, I had to figure out what parts of the house have been infected with mold. Okay, that's got to go. Well, what should stay? Okay, this beam, this piece of wood, this piece of floor, that can stay because it hasn't been affected. Later on the song, what happens now when all I've made is torn down? This is the unmaking, the beauty in the breaking. Well, it certainly doesn't feel beautiful when you're being broken like that, when you had this expectation and you're like, this wasn't how it's supposed to go. We were supposed to just walk in, get the keys, and it had the right layout, had this nice backyard, it had the right setup for me to teach piano in the basement or whatever, and it didn't turn out how I thought it was going to be. And that was a humbling experience, and it was all tied to my arrogance, forgetting humility. So if we have this pendulum, if it does land in the middle, and if true humility maybe lands somewhere in the middle there, what does that look like? Well, maybe humility is this. It's knowing who you are. It's knowing your inherent worth, having clarity as to why you are here. It's honest. It's an honest estimation of yourself. It's not under and it's not over-exaggerated, but it is true based on what you know at this point in time. As well, it's not touched by public opinion. It doesn't really matter who's saying what. You know it to be true, and that's really all that matters. Last year, I had this great opportunity to go to Oahu in Hawaii, and I was there for a retreat with an amazing group of people. It was called Soul on Fire Mastery, and if any of my sisters are listening to this, much love to you. It was an awesome experience. It was humbling actually just going there because there was about 20 or so people, and there was one other guy other than me. So I remember sitting in that room the first day, and as much as I knew a lot of the people, and we had been developing friendships over the year, I thought, oh my goodness, what have I just done? This is going to be intense. And it was so good. And I loved the experience. There was one moment that just, it changed my life forever. And we had broken up into two different groups, kind of smaller groups. And we each had an opportunity to explain where we're at, where we're stuck, and where we would like to move. And then we left the group. And the group then spent about 20 minutes thinking about what they could do to create an experience for us, so that we could feel and we could see and experience and taste and touch what we are going through. Much like a mirror experience, except instead of it just being like a physical kind of mirror, it was like a all-encompassing, all senses were being touched by this. So when my turn came up, I came back to the group after they had deliberated for about 20 minutes, and one of the things that happened was I was sitting in this chair, this hammock outside. It's beautiful on the shores of Oahu, the North Shore, overlooking the mountains, the ocean. Idyllic. Like, it was probably one of the most beautiful places I've ever stayed. And I was sitting in this hammock, and they all were sort of surrounding me, and they did this thing where they kind of bowed down to me in a respectful way, not in like a belittling, mocking way, but in an honest way that like, we honor you, Brad. And we are bowing down to you because we see the value that you have. And even as I'm thinking this, I remember this moment so clearly. And this word came up to me from one of the coaches in the group, Angelina, and she said, sovereignty. That was the word that she gave to me. And I took that on into my mind of, I am sovereign. I have an inner calm authority inside of me that is there, and it's not to be dismissed and to be squashed and forgotten, but it needs to come out. And later on, a couple months after that, this prayer came to mind, and I said, God, I need your help, not because I can't do this, but more importantly, because I can, because I do have this calm, loving inner authority inside of me, and I desperately desire to approach that with a true sense of humility. One of the greatest thinkers of our time in the leadership realm is a gentleman by the name of John Maxwell. I'm sure you've heard of him. Written many books, a trusted authority, an inner authority in leadership. He's dedicated his life to this. And there was something he said a couple of years ago that has just stayed with me up until this day. And he says this, that there are really only about 4 to 5 things that I really know. And when I said that, I thought, how is that possible? You're an amazing author. You are someone that I perceive to be humble and who has a lot of wisdom and experience to offer. And yet you're saying that it's condensed down to 4 or 5 things. And he went on to describe it like this. When he was younger, he knew a lot, or at least he thought he knew a lot. He had wisdom. He always had the answer. He was able to problem solve. He had that ability to tap into what he knew to be true. But as he got older and lived life and was open to different possibilities, he started to realize that maybe he didn't know everything that he thought he knew. And it could fit into this one hand, right? And maybe for me and for you, maybe we're in our stage in our life where we are using all of our digits on both hands and both feet, and maybe some more parts of us where we know a lot more. We think we have this we have all the answers. If anyone were to ask us about information or what we think about things or our opinion, we'd be able to easily give it to them because we know, right? So this is my question: is then what do we really know? You know, if John Maxwell is hinting at something here, what does he really know? That was my question. What are those 4 to 5 things? But then what is it that I know? I think there's a disease that we have. It's the know-it-all disease. I'm not sure if you have it or if you know someone who has it, but don't tell me I've got this. You don't. I remember my dad, he used to, say to me, "You just know it all, Brad. I can't tell you anything." And I see it in my kids too. We have this disease. Well, what is the possible cure for this disease? I think it is I let go of what I think I know. That's hard to do. How can we let go of what we think we know? Recently, I've been doing a little bit of yoga over the years, but I've been kind of reintroduced back to this child's pose, which, if you know what that is, basically you are on the ground. It's usually at the end of a yoga session. I don't do yoga that often, but I do it in my workout routine. And it is when you're on the ground, you're on your knees, and your arms are either by your side or they're out in front of you. And it's a very honest posture, and you are putting yourself out there. There are health benefits to child's pose. It can help with digestion, and it can stretch your lower back. But more importantly, it gives you permission to say it's okay to rest. And it's okay to approach this in a very childlike manner. When I work out, when I first get to the session, I put a lot of effort into burning calories, and I go hard at it. But at the end of every workout, I am in child's pose. So even though as I walk in as an adult, upright, tall, strong, confident, I always leave on the ground because I'm spent and I need to give myself permission just to rest in that spot. So we move from child physically to an adult, but then we need to come back to the discipline of being childlike, to being curious. That takes a lot of discipline. That takes a lot of challenge, but it is one of the pieces, I think, that can unlock humility for ourselves. Even the simple posture of our body can illuminate and help us move into a position of humility. It's much like the words of Buddha, who talks about the beginner's mindset, approaching something as if you don't know what it is. It's something that you are curious about, and you're willing to let go of everything that you previously thought and allow something new to emerge because you are emptying yourself. And Jesus talks about this too, right? Those who come to him as little children will inherit the kingdom. Same kind of principle here is that we let go of what we think we know so that we can be open to what is available to us. So here's a question that I find myself leading up to is, why is it so hard to be humble? We can know these things. We know that we don't know everything. We can be honest with ourselves, but why is it so hard to be a humble person, to have an attitude of humility in a world that doesn't necessarily praise humility or has some weird twisted versions of what humility actually is? And I think there's a hint, and it comes from evolution and an evolutionary mindset. And I got this from Richard Rohr recently, and he describes it like this, is that there's a tension in trying to find a fixed point in an ever-expanding and evolving universe. So imagine this. You have a dot, and then you have an arrow off to the right of it. And the arrow is kind of close to the dot, but it's not connected. That dot represents what you know, or at least what you think you know. And there's truth to it. You can say, yes, I believe this to be true. I know this is what is right now. But the arrow is the world in which we live, which is a universe that is expanding. It is growing. And kind of like what Rob Bell talks about in his tour, the Everything is Spiritual tour, he describes it like the universe only has one direction. It's only going in one single direction, and that's forward. What is happening tomorrow is going to be different than what happens today. There might be principles that are familiar, and we kind of will see things happen that look the same, but it's always moving in some direction. There's something that is growing and developing and changing. There's no constant. The only constant in the universe is change. That's the only thing that we can be assured of, is that constant evolution. So Richard Rohr, he goes on to describe it like this. He says, evolutionary thinking is actually contemplative thinking because it leaves the full field of the future in God's hands and agrees to humbly hold the present with its current tentative knowledge. Evolutionary thinking agrees to both knowing and not knowing at the same time. It allows us to be in a childlike posture, to humbly hold that what I understand now is temporary, it is passing, it is momentary. And if this bigger field of vision is moving in a direction, then I will allow myself to live in this tension between what I think I know and what is actually happening. And we're able to allow that pendulum to move from a false humility and not swing so far to the other side that is arrogant and let's just forget humility and act like we know everything, but we can allow it to kind of fall back into a gentle, calm inner knowing that says, you know what? Based on what I know right now, I can stand in this, but I also will hold loosely the fact that I do not know everything. There's way more going on than I could ever understand. This delicious pie that we get to eat in life comes to us one of two ways. It's either served to us by the slice or we choose to serve ourselves. On one hand, most times that humble pie is shoved in front of us and we have to chew it and we got to eat it, and it doesn't taste good. It's not how it was supposed to happen. We had no idea that we would lose that thing in life. We would have gone financially down. We would have lost money. I had no idea that my marriage would fall apart. It would break. I had no idea that my kids would have this sickness. I had no idea that I would be dealing with anxiety my whole life. We don't like that humble pie, but it is there to serve us. It is served to us, the humble pie. And if we will eat it, we will learn some things about ourselves and others that will and can change us. The other way that humble pie can come is we get to serve ourselves. We get to choose it. We get to see the mirror of who we really are, and a good coach and other people and friends and mentors can help us with that. We can have the posture, the child's pose that says, I lay myself in a position where I don't know everything. That dot, that evolutionary thinking between what I currently know right now and the line that's moving forward, I know that I don't know it all. And I will give myself permission to sit in that tension. You've been listening to the B-Rad podcast today, brought to you by myself, Brad Taves, and that's spelled Toews. Find me on Facebook and Instagram. Would love to connect with you there. Today's music was brought to you by Finn's Fandango. And finally, to you, my friends, be radical in your becoming of the person that you were always born to be.